Abigail Harper pressed both hands flat against her stomach and held her breath, the way she'd been taught since girlhood. Make yourself smaller. Take up less room. Disappear if you can. But standing alone on that railroad platform in Pawnee Crossing, Kansas, with a crumpled telegram in her fist and an entire town staring at the fat woman nobody came to collect, there was no making herself small enough. The man she'd crossed 3 states to marry had sent 6 words instead of a ring. Marriage postponed. Do not seek me. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow Abigail's journey to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far her story travels. The station master read the telegram before she did. Abigail knew because of the way he folded it, slowly, like a man folding a flag over a coffin. He slid it across the counter without looking at her face. Came in about an hour ago, miss. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it once, then again. Marriage postponed. Do not seek me. Victor Caldwell. 6 words, not even 7, not even enough to fill a breath. She folded it back along the same creases, tucked it into her glove, and turned around to face the platform. 14 people were watching her, she counted. 14. 2 women near the water pump, a cluster of men outside the feed store, a mother pulling her daughter closer, as though rejection were something you could catch. 3 cowboys leaning on the rail, hats tipped low, mouths already moving. Nobody spoke to her, but everybody spoke about her. Lord, that's a big woman. Victor Caldwell's bride? That one? Well, can't blame the man, can you? Abigail heard every word. She had always heard every word. Since she was 9 years old, and her own mother had sewn her dresses with extra panels and said, "We just won't mention it, Abby. We'll just accommodate." Accommodate. That was the word her whole life had been built around. Wider chairs, looser corsets, longer fabric, smaller plates at dinner, so nobody would see how much she actually ate, which was never more than anyone else, but that never mattered. What mattered was what people assumed when they looked at her. And right now, 14 people in Pawnee Crossing, Kansas, were assuming exactly what Victor Caldwell had confirmed. She was too much, too big, too heavy, too wide, too present, too much woman for any man to want. Abigail gripped the handle of her suitcase. One suitcase, because Victor had told her to pack light, told her the house was furnished, told her everything she needed would be waiting, and she stood perfectly still. She did not cry. She would not give them that. The sun pressed down on the platform like a punishment. July in Kansas had no mercy and no shade, and Abigail's pale blue traveling dress was already soaked through at the back. She could feel the sweat running between her shoulder blades, pooling in her waist, making the fabric cling to every curve and fold that Victor had once called womanly in his letters, and now apparently found unacceptable in person. Not that he'd come in person. He hadn't even had the decency to reject her face to face. 3 states. She had crossed 3 states on a promise written in ink on perfumed paper. 37 letters over 4 months, each one more tender than the last, each one more specific in its affection. I admire a woman of substance, Abigail, a woman who fills a room, not just with her body, but with her presence. She had believed him. God help her, she had believed every word. Miss? She turned. The station master stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking at her the way men looked at horses with broken legs. Pity mixed with the quiet calculation of what to do with something that couldn't be fixed. Next eastbound train comes through Thursday, he said. If you need to, go back. Go back. To what? Her father's house, where she'd already been packed off like surplus inventory? Her sister's spare room, where she'd sleep on a cot and listen to her brother-in-law make jokes about feeding an extra mouth? The teaching position she'd resigned from because Victor Caldwell had written, "You won't need to work, darling. I will provide." Thank you, Abigail said. I'll manage." The station master nodded and retreated. She stood there. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10. The crowd thinned, but the staring didn't stop. It just became more discreet. Glances from behind curtains. Whispers around corners. And then the wagon came. She heard the wheels first. Then the boys. "Pa, can we get peppermint sticks?" "Pa, Thomas said I couldn't have 2, but last time he had 2, and I only—" "Caleb, hush." The wagon pulled up to the platform. A man climbed down. Tall, sunburned, lean in the way that hard work makes a body lean. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved with a dull knife, and eyes set so deep they seemed to be watching from somewhere far back inside his skull. He wore no hat. His shirt was sweat-stained at the collar. His boots were caked with something she didn't want to identify. 2 boys sat in the wagon bed. The older one, maybe 9, stared straight ahead with the rigid posture of a child trying to be a man. The younger one, 6 maybe, was picking at a scab on his knee and humming. The man, Samuel Reed, though she didn't know his name yet, walked past her toward the station office, then stopped, backed up 2 steps, and looked at her. Not at her body, at her face, specifically at her eyes, at the way they were dry, at the way her jaw was set, at the way she held that suitcase like a weapon rather than a burden. "Ma'am," he said. "Sir? You waiting for someone?" "I was." She paused. "He's already gone." Samuel Reed stood there for a moment. The sun beat down on both of them. A horsefly buzzed between their faces, and neither flinched. "The Caldwell fella," he said, not a question. "Word travels fast. Small town." He shifted his weight, looked at the wagon, looked at his boys, looked back at her. "My wife died 14 months ago. Fever took her in the night. Didn't even get to say goodbye." Abigail said nothing. "Thomas hasn't smiled since. Caleb still sets a plate for her at supper. I can't—" He stopped, swallowed something that looked like it hurt. "I can't keep raising them alone. I've written to every matrimonial agency east of the Mississippi. No one wants to come to Kansas. No one wants a man with 2 boys and a ranch that's 3 bad weeks from going under." "I'm sorry for your loss," Abigail said. "I don't need sorry." He looked at her again, hard, direct. "I need someone who won't quit." The silence between them was enormous. "You don't know me," she said. "No, ma'am. You don't know anything about me. I know you're still standing. Most women would have sat down by now, or cried, or gone inside to wait for the next train out." He nodded toward her suitcase. "You're not going inside. You're not crying. And you're not sitting down. That doesn't mean I'm suitable for— I've got a house with 4 rooms, a kitchen that works, a well that doesn't run dry, 2 boys who need someone to teach them that women aren't just people who leave." He paused. "I ain't offering romance, ma'am. I'm offering a roof, honest work, and a man who won't send you a telegram instead of showing up." Abigail stared at him. 14 people were still watching. She could feel every one of their eyes. "You're proposing marriage," she said flatly. "I'm proposing partnership. To a woman you met 40 seconds ago. 30 seconds longer than most decisions I've made that turned out right." She almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught somewhere in her chest and became something else. Not grief, not relief, but something raw. "People will talk," she said. "People are already talking." "They'll say you married me out of pity." "Let them." "They'll say I'm too—" "Ma'am." He stepped closer. Not threatening, not gentle, just certain. "I buried a woman who weighed 98 pounds. She was the strongest person I ever knew, and her body had nothing to do with it. I don't care what you weigh. I care whether you'll stay. Abigail Harper looked at this man, this stranger with his sunburned neck and his two silent boys and his dead wife's ghost still sitting in the passenger seat of his wagon. And she made a decision. Not because she had no options, because she recognized something. She recognized a man who was telling the truth. They walked to the chapel, in broad daylight, past every window, past every whisper. Thomas and Caleb trailed behind. Thomas suspicious, Caleb confused. Pa, are we getting peppermint sticks or not? After, Caleb. After what? After I get married. Caleb processed this. To who? Samuel nodded toward Abigail. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. He had his father's deep-set eyes and a gap between his front teeth wide enough to whistle through. Are you nice? He asked. I try to be, she said. Do you know how to make biscuits? I do. Better than Mrs. Hannigan's? Because hers taste like the barn smells. Abigail almost smiled. I'll do my best. Caleb turned to his father. I like her. Thomas said nothing. He walked with his arms stiff at his sides, fists clenched, jaw working. 9 years old and already armored. Abigail noticed. She filed it away in the part of her mind that cataloged hurt, the part that had been building its inventory since childhood. The chapel was small, whitewashed. The Reverend was eating his lunch on the front step and looked up with crumbs in his beard. Samuel Reed, wasn't expecting you today. Wasn't expecting me either, Reverend, but here I am. The Reverend looked at Abigail. His eyes traveled down, then up. She watched him do it. She'd watched 1,000 men do it. The inventory, the assessment, the quiet arithmetic of flesh and judgment. This the Caldwell bride? He asked. She's the Reed bride now, Samuel said, if she'll have me. The Reverend looked at Abigail. Miss, this what you want? Every answer she'd ever been taught said no. No, you don't marry strangers. No, you don't make desperate choices. No, you don't stand in a dusty chapel in a sweat-soaked dress with a crumpled telegram in your glove and say yes to a man whose last name you learned 3 minutes ago. But every answer she'd ever been taught had also told her to make herself smaller, to accommodate, to shrink. She was done shrinking. Yes, she said. This is what I want. The ceremony took 4 minutes. No music, no flowers, no rings. Samuel promised to have one made by the end of the week. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss the bride," Samuel looked at her and said quietly, "Only when you're ready, ma'am." She nodded. He didn't kiss her. And that single act of restraint told her more about Samuel Reed than 37 letters from Victor Caldwell ever had. The wagon ride to the ranch took 40 minutes. Caleb fell asleep against Abigail's arm within 10. His body was warm and small and trusting in the way only a 6-year-old's body can be. She held still, barely breathing, terrified of waking him. Thomas sat on the opposite side of the wagon bed, as far from her as geometry allowed. Samuel drove. He didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something patient. Like the silence between two people who both knew that words, right now, would only get in the way. The ranch appeared slowly. A house, a barn, a fence line that stretched toward the horizon. Everything was sun-bleached and wind-worn. The porch sagged on the left side. A rocker sat empty by the door. That was hers, Thomas said suddenly. His voice was sharp, accusatory. That chair, that was my mother's. Thomas, Samuel started. She's not my mother. The words hit the air like a slap. Abigail looked at the boy. His face was a mask of controlled fury, the kind of control that a 9-year-old shouldn't know how to wield. "No," she said calmly. "I'm not." Thomas blinked. He'd expected a fight, or tears, or one of those awful sugary reassurances that adults use to paper over pain. "I'm not your mother," Abigail repeated, "and I won't pretend to be. But I am here, and I plan to stay." Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he climbed out of the wagon and walked into the house without another word. Samuel exhaled. He's angry," Abigail said. "He's supposed to be." Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted behind those deep-set eyes. Something that might have been the first crack in 14 months of carefully maintained composure. "The kitchen's through the back," he said quietly. "I'll bring your suitcase in." "I can carry it." "I know you can." He picked it up anyway. "But you don't have to." That first night, Abigail lay awake on a narrow bed in a room that smelled like dust and lavender. Someone had put dried lavender under the pillow, and she suspected it wasn't Samuel. She could hear Caleb breathing through the thin wall, deep and even, trusting. She could hear Thomas not sleeping, the restless creak of his bed frame, the small, controlled sounds of a boy trying not to cry. And somewhere outside she could hear Samuel, on the porch, the slow creak of his boots on wood, pacing the way men pace when they've made a decision and are waiting to find out if it was the right one. Abigail stared at the ceiling. 24 hours ago, she had been on a train, pressing her forehead against the glass, watching the prairie unscroll like a promise. She had been Abigail Harper, Victor Caldwell's bride-to-be. She had been certain. She had been hopeful. She had been a fool. Now she was Abigail Reed, wife of a stranger, stepmother to 2 grieving boys, resident of a ranch she'd never seen in a town that had already decided she was a joke. She pressed her hands flat against her stomach, old habit. Then she moved them to her sides, new choice. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she decided, she would not try to earn this family's love. She would not perform. She would not shrink. She would not apologize for the space she occupied in this house, in this bed, in this life. She would simply show up, and she would keep showing up until showing up meant something. Outside, the porch creaking stopped. A door closed softly. Silence filled the house like water filling a well, slowly from the bottom up. Abigail Harper Reed slept for the first time in Kansas with her hands at her sides and her lungs full of prairie air. She did not dream of Victor Caldwell. She did not dream at all. The rooster crowed at 4:30, and Abigail was already awake. She had been awake since 3, lying in that narrow bed, listening to the house settle and groan around her like an old man shifting in his sleep. She'd counted the cracks in the ceiling. 7. She'd counted the heartbeats in her chest. Too many. And she'd counted the reasons she should get up before anyone else, because the first person to claim a kitchen claims a home, and Abigail Harper Reed was not about to let this house decide she didn't belong. She dressed quickly. The floorboards protested under her weight, and she winced at each creak, moving carefully past the boys' room, past the closed door where Samuel slept, or didn't sleep. She'd heard the porch creak twice more during the night. The kitchen was worse than she'd expected. Grease caked on the stove, flour moths in the pantry, a stack of tin plates crusted with something that might have been beans 3 days ago. The window above the basin was smeared so thick with dust she couldn't see through it. She rolled up her sleeves. By the time Samuel appeared in the doorway, she had the stove lit, the plates scrubbed, and biscuits browning in the oven. Real biscuits, not the flat, sad things she'd seen crumbled on the counter, leftover attempts by a man who clearly cooked the way he grieved, badly, and without asking for help. Samuel stopped in the doorway. He stared at the kitchen, then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I know. I mean, the kitchen was a disaster. Yes. He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once. Coffee smells good. Sit down. He sat. Abigail poured. Their fingers didn't touch when she handed him the cup, but the distance between them felt deliberate. Not cold, just careful. Two people measuring the space they were willing to share. The boys usually wake around 5, he said. Caleb's already up. I heard him talking to something in his room. I think it's a frog. Samuel almost smiled. He keeps them in a jar by the window. Martha used to... He stopped. The name hit the air and hung there, heavy as smoke. Martha. His dead wife. The woman whose lavender still lived under Abigail's pillow. She used to let him keep them? Abigail finished. She used to make him release them by Sunday. He stared into his coffee. I haven't had the heart to enforce it. I'll handle it. He looked up. You don't have to... Samuel. She said his name for the first time, and it felt strange in her mouth. Too intimate and too formal all at once. You asked for a partner. Let me be one. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. Caleb burst through the kitchen door like a small tornado, barefoot, shirt untucked, frog in hand. I named him General, he announced. General Greenlegs. He ate a fly this morning, a big one, and it was disgusting and wonderful. Caleb, Samuel said, is that biscuits? Real biscuits? Not the flat ones Pa makes that taste like... Caleb. What? Shirt, tucked, boots, on. Caleb looked down at himself as though seeing his own body for the first time. Oh. He looked at Abigail. Are you going to be here every morning? That's the plan. And you'll make biscuits? If there's flour. Caleb turned to Samuel with the grave seriousness of a child delivering a verdict. Pa, she can stay. The laugh that escaped Abigail's chest surprised her. It was the first real laugh she'd produced in months. Not the polite, contained sound she made in company, but something full and unguarded. It filled the kitchen. Caleb grinned. Samuel's mouth twitched. Thomas appeared in the hallway. He did not enter the kitchen. Thomas, Samuel said, come eat. Not hungry. Didn't ask if you were hungry. Come eat. Thomas walked to the table with the mechanical precision of a soldier, following orders he despised. He sat as far from Abigail as possible. He took a biscuit without looking at her, bit into it, chewed. Something happened to his face. Just for a second, a flicker, a softening, the involuntary response of a body receiving something it had been missing. Then the mask came back, harder than before. It's fine, he said flatly. Just a biscuit. Abigail said nothing. She didn't need to. She'd seen the flicker. She could work with a flicker. After breakfast, Samuel pushed back from the table and said, I've got fencing to repair on the south line. Be gone most of the day. He looked at Abigail with something that might have been concern. You'll be all right here? I've been all right in worse places. He held her gaze again, that same measuring look. Then he took his hat from the hook by the door, settled it on his head, and walked out. Abigail stood at the kitchen window, the one she'd scrubbed clean, and watched him go. His walk was steady, unhurried, the walk of a man who'd learned that rushing didn't make the work go faster. Then she turned to face her real work, the house. It wasn't dirty the way a lazy man's house is dirty. It was dirty the way a drowning man's house is dirty. Everything neglected not from carelessness, but from a grief so consuming that even basic maintenance felt like an impossible luxury. Martha had been dead for 14 months, and in those 14 months, the house had been slowly dying too. Abigail started in the pantry. She pulled everything out, threw away the moth-eaten flour, the rancid lard, the jar of preserves so old the lid had rusted shut. She reorganized what remained, which wasn't much, and made a list of what was needed. Then the linen closet, then the washroom, then the boys' room, where she discovered that Thomas's bed was made with military precision and Caleb's looked like a small animal had nested in it. She didn't touch Thomas's things. She made Caleb's bed. She released 3 frogs from 3 separate jars. General Greenlegs went last, and she told him, "You're welcome," before he disappeared into the grass. By midday, she was dripping with sweat, her dress clinging to her in ways that would have mortified her a week ago. But there was no one watching, no one measuring, no one calculating the arithmetic of her flesh. She sat on the porch, not in Martha's rocker, not yet, just on the step, and let the hot wind dry her face. "You moved my mother's things." Thomas stood behind her. She hadn't heard him approach, and for a 9-year-old, that was impressive. "I moved nothing of your mother's," she said without turning around. "You cleaned the pantry." "She organized that pantry." "Thomas, moths organize that pantry. Your mother organized it first, and she did it well. But moths don't respect the dead any more than dust does." He was quiet. She could feel his rage. Not the explosive kind, but the slow burning kind. The kind that eats through a child's insides like acid, because there's no one safe to aim it at. "You can be angry at me," she said. "I can take it." "I'm not angry." "All right." "I'm not. I heard you." He stood there for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, "She made biscuits, too. Better than yours." Abigail nodded. "I believe that." Thomas walked away. His boots hit the dirt hard, harder than necessary. The footsteps of a boy trying to leave marks on a world that had already erased the person he loved most. The afternoon brought the first visitor. Abigail was elbow-deep in washwater when she heard the wagon approach. She dried her hands, pushed the hair from her face, and walked to the front of the house. A woman sat on the wagon seat. Thin, straight-backed, dressed in black despite the heat. She had the face of someone who'd been pretty once, and now wore her former beauty like a faded campaign ribbon. Visible, but no longer relevant. "Mrs. Reed," the woman said. The name caught Abigail off guard. It was the first time anyone other than the Reverend had called her that. "Yes?" "I'm Clara Dawson. I live 2 miles east. I brought you a pie." She held up a covered dish. "And some advice." "I'll take the pie," Abigail said. "The advice depends." Clara Dawson climbed down from the wagon with the efficient movements of a woman who'd done everything herself for years. She handed over the pie, peach from the smell, and looked at Abigail with an expression that was neither kind nor unkind. It was assessment, pure and unfiltered. "You're bigger than I expected," Clara said. "Most people find that." Victor Caldwell told half the county his bride was statuesque. That's not the word I'd use. Abigail set the pie on the porch rail. "What word would you use, Mrs. Dawson?" Clara considered this. "Substantial." "I've been called worse." "I imagine you have." Clara folded her arms. "Listen, I'm not here to be cruel. I'm here because Samuel Reed is the only decent man left in this county, and his boys have been through enough. If you're here to use him as a stepping stone until something better comes along, Mrs. Dawson." Abigail's voice was level and clear. "I was abandoned on a train platform yesterday. I married a man I'd known for 5 minutes. I scrubbed his kitchen at 4 o'clock this morning and released 3 frogs from his 6-year-old's bedroom. Do I strike you as a woman looking for something better?" Clara stared at her. Then something cracked in that rigid face. Not a smile. Clara Dawson didn't seem like a woman who smiled easily. But something close to respect. "Martha was my friend," Clara said. "My best friend. She died in that house, in that back bedroom, and Samuel carried her out himself because the doctor didn't come in time." Abigail felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. "I won't replace her," she said. "No," Clara agreed. "You won't. But you might fill some of the silence she left behind." She turned back toward her wagon. "The peach pie needs to be eaten today. I don't make them to be wasted." "Mrs. Dawson?" Clara paused. "Thank you," Abigail said, "for the pie, and for being honest." Clara climbed back onto the wagon. "Honest is the only thing I know how to be. It's why I've only got 2 friends in this town." She picked up the reins. "Well, 1 now." The wagon pulled away. Abigail watched it go, holding a peach pie in both hands, standing in the yard of a dead woman's house, wearing a dead woman's apron that she'd found hanging on a hook in the kitchen and put on without thinking. She looked down at the apron, took it off, folded it carefully, put it in a drawer. Then she got a clean cloth, tied it around her own waist, and went back to work. Samuel returned at dusk, and the house he walked into was not the house he'd left. He stood in the kitchen doorway, the same spot he'd stood that morning. And this time, he didn't just stare. He went still. The kind of still that men go when something they've been carrying for a long time suddenly gets lighter, and they don't trust the relief. "You cleaned everything," he said. "Not everything. The barn still smells like the barn." The accounts ledger. He pointed to the table where she'd spread out the ranch's books, the ones she'd found in a drawer, covered in dust, numbers scrawled in a hand that had clearly given up on accuracy months ago. "You went through the accounts?" "Samuel, you're paying 15% above market for grain. The supplier in Wichita is cheating you. Has been for at least 6 months." He blinked. "How do you know what grain costs in Wichita?" "My father ran a dry goods store for 30 years. I did his books from the time I was 12. She tapped the ledger. "You're also overdue on the land tax, by 3 months." "I know that." "Do you know the penalty doubles after 90 days? He sat down heavily, ran both hands over his face. The sound he made was somewhere between a sigh and a surrender. "Martha handled the books," he said. "I know. I know." She pushed a plate toward him. Biscuits, beans, sliced peach pie from Clara Dawson's offering. "Eat first, then we'll talk numbers." He ate. Slowly at first, then faster, like a man who'd forgotten that food could taste like something other than obligation. "Caleb says you released General Greenlegs," he said between bites. "General Greenlegs is now a free citizen of Kansas." He cried for an hour. "He'll survive." Samuel looked at her. "You're harder than you look." "I'm exactly as hard as I need to be." Something passed between them. Not attraction. Not yet. Something more fundamental. Recognition. The mutual understanding of 2 people who had both learned, through separate and brutal educations, that softness was a luxury and endurance was a skill. "Thank you," he said, "for the food, for the kitchen, for the—" He gestured vaguely at the house, at the order she'd imposed on his chaos. "Don't thank me. Pay me in honesty." "Ma'am?" "Tell me about Victor Caldwell." Samuel set down his fork. His expression changed. Not anger exactly, but something guarded, protective. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you know, because a man like that doesn't just disappear. He sends a telegram that says, 'Do not seek me,' and that's a man who expects to be sought. That's a man who'll come back when he's ready, on his terms." Samuel was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Victor Caldwell arrived in Pawnee Crossing 6 months ago. Bought drinks for everyone. Talked about investments, railroads, Eastern money. Wore clothes that cost more than most men here earn in a year." He paused. "Charmed every woman in town, and half the men. Started asking questions about land values, water rights. Then he started writing to matrimonial agencies. Looking for a wife. Looking for a dowry." Samuel met her eyes. "He asked 3 families for their daughters before your name came up. Every one of them said no once they checked his references, or lack of them. Abigail's hands tightened in her lap. My father didn't check references. No offense, ma'am, but your father was either desperate or foolish. Both. The word came out hard and clean. He had 3 daughters, 2 married, 1. She looked down at herself. 1 accommodation that wouldn't fit through any door he tried to push her through. That's not what I see, Samuel said quietly. What do you see? He took a long time answering. I see a woman who fixed my kitchen, caught my supplier cheating, released my son's frogs, and didn't flinch when a 9-year-old tried to make her feel like an intruder. He picked his fork back up. I see someone who stays. Abigail felt something dangerous in her chest, something warm and unfamiliar and terrifying. She killed it quickly, not because it was wrong, but because it was too soon. Trust, she had learned, was not a thing you gave. It was a thing you built. Brick by brick, biscuit by biscuit, frog by released frog. Victor will come back, she said. I know. He'll want something. He always does. And when he comes, I need you to let me handle it. Samuel frowned. Abigail, I mean it. He's not a man you fight with fists. He's a man you fight with truth. And the truth about Victor Caldwell is something only I know, because I'm the fool who believed his letters. Samuel set his jaw. She could see the argument building behind his eyes, the instinct to protect, to step in front, to do what men on the prairie were taught to do. I'm not asking you to stand down, she said. I'm asking you to stand beside. He held her gaze. The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the house, Caleb laughed at something. A bright, pure sound that cut through the silence like sunlight through dust. Beside, Samuel repeated. Beside. He nodded. Once. Slowly. All right, Mrs. Reed. Beside it is. That night, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open before her and a pencil in her hand. She worked the numbers by lamplight. Feed costs, livestock counts, outstanding debts, projected yields. The ranch wasn't dying, but it was bleeding. Slowly. The kind of bleed that a man too proud to ask for help wouldn't notice until he collapsed. She wrote a letter to the grain supplier in Wichita. Polite, professional, devastating. She outlined every overcharge, cited market rates from memory, and closed with a single sentence. I trust future invoices will reflect accurate pricing, as I would hate for this discrepancy to become a matter of public record. She sealed the envelope and set it by the door. Then she heard the footsteps. Small, careful, bare feet on wood. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was in his nightshirt, hair mussed, eyes red. I can't sleep, he said. I know. I wasn't coming to see you. I know that too. He stood there, caught between the need to retreat and the need to stay. She didn't move, didn't invite him closer, didn't push. Ma used to sit in this kitchen at night, he said. She'd write letters to her sister in Missouri. Did she? She'd let me sit with her. She wouldn't talk, she'd just let me be there. Abigail set down her pencil. She looked at the chair across from her. She said nothing. Thomas stood in the doorway for 10 more seconds. Then he walked to the table, pulled out the chair, and sat down. He folded his arms on the table and rested his chin on his forearms. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. She picked up her pencil and went back to the ledger. They sat like that for 20 minutes. No words, no eye contact. Just 2 people sharing a kitchen table and the particular kind of silence that exists between strangers who might, given enough time and enough patience, become something else. When Thomas finally stood up, he said, Your biscuits aren't as good as hers. I know. But they're not bad. He walked back to his room. His footsteps were softer this time. Not the hard, angry stamps of the afternoon. Something quieter. Something that might, if she listened carefully enough, sound almost like the first step toward trust. Abigail sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after that. She pressed her hands against the table, not against her stomach. Against the solid, real surface of a table in a house that was starting, slowly and reluctantly, to feel like hers. She blew out the lamp and went to bed. In the dark, from the porch, she heard the creak of boots again. Samuel, pacing. But slower this time. Less like worry. More like a man learning to breathe in a house that was, impossibly, beginning to breathe again. 3 weeks changed everything and nothing. Abigail had learned the rhythm of the ranch the way a musician learns a song. Not all at once, but note by note, mistake by mistake, until the melody lived inside her body. She knew that Samuel woke before the rooster, and that he stood on the porch for exactly 4 minutes before heading to the barn. She knew Caleb talked in his sleep, full conversations with imaginary soldiers, and at least 2 more frogs he'd smuggled past her inspection. She knew Thomas watched her from doorways. Always doorways. Never fully entering a room she occupied. As if crossing that threshold would mean something he wasn't ready to admit. And she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent her whole life reading the silences between what people said and what they meant, that Victor Caldwell was coming back. She knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the first cloud appears. A pressure drop, an instinct, a tightening in the gut that no amount of rational thinking can talk away. So when Clara Dawson's wagon came tearing up the road on a Tuesday morning, dust flying, horse lathered, Clara herself standing half upright on the seat like a woman delivering a war dispatch, Abigail was already on the porch. "He's here," Clara said before the wagon fully stopped. "Rode into town this morning. Got himself a room at the hotel and a lawyer from Topeka." Abigail gripped the porch rail. Her knuckles went white. A lawyer, young one, skinny, looks like he's never eaten a full meal or told the truth in his life. Clara climbed down, breathing hard. "Abigail, he's telling people you owe him money. Travel expenses. Breach of contract. He's got papers." "What kind of papers?" "The kind that look official, whether they are or not." Abigail's mind moved fast, faster than her body ever had, faster than anyone who looked at her would expect. She sorted facts like cards in a deck. Victor had paid for her train ticket. That was true. Victor had sent her letters promising marriage. Also true. But a promise wasn't a contract, and a train ticket wasn't a debt. Unless you had a lawyer willing to argue otherwise in front of a town that already thought the fat woman got what she deserved. "Where's Samuel?" Clara asked. "South pasture. He won't be back until evening." "You need to tell him." "I will, but not yet." Abigail looked at Clara. "What else is Victor doing in town?" Clara hesitated. That hesitation told Abigail everything. "He's talking," Abigail said. "He's doing more than talking. He's buying drinks at the saloon, shaking hands, telling anyone who'll listen that Samuel Reed stole his bride and he wants compensation." Clara's voice dropped. "And he's telling them other things. About you." "What things?" "That you're not what you presented yourself to be. That your letters were misleading. That you sent a photograph that wasn't—" Clara stopped. "That wasn't accurate," Abigail finished. Her voice was flat, dead flat. The flatness of a woman who had heard every version of this accusation and knew there would always be another. "Did you send him a photograph?" Clara asked. "I did. It was accurate. He saw exactly what I looked like." Abigail's jaw tightened. "He didn't care about my size until my father's business failed and the dowry disappeared. Then suddenly I was too big, too plain, too much." Clara stared at her. "Your dowry disappeared?" 3 weeks before the wedding. My father's store went bankrupt. Victor found out, I don't know how, and that telegram arrived the next day. Abigail looked at her hands. He never cared about my body, Clara. He cared about my father's money. And when the money vanished, so did he. Then why come back now? Because Samuel has land. Because I'm living on that land. And because Victor Caldwell is the kind of man who believes that if he can't profit from a woman, the least he can do is punish her for costing him time. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to town." "Alone?" "Alone." "Abigail, that's Clara." Abigail stepped off the porch. She moved with purpose, not grace, not the delicate movements that women were supposed to make, but the solid, deliberate stride of a person who had decided where she was going and refused to be redirected. I've spent my entire life letting other people fight my battles. My mother fought them by hiding me. My father fought them by selling me. Victor fought them by leaving. I am done letting other people decide how my story goes. Clara looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded. "Take my wagon. Your horse won't make it fast enough." Abigail climbed up onto the wagon seat. The springs groaned under her weight. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She picked up the reins. "Tell the boys I'll be back for supper," she said. "What do I tell Samuel?" Abigail paused. "Tell him I asked him to stand beside me, and I meant it. But some fights, you have to start alone before anyone can join you." She drove toward town. The road to Pawnee Crossing was 4 miles of dust and heat, and Abigail used every mile to think. She thought about Victor's letters, the ones she'd kept in a ribbon-tied bundle in her suitcase, the ones she hadn't thrown away because some part of her had known they might become evidence. She thought about the photograph she'd sent him, honest, unflattering, taken by a photographer who hadn't bothered to arrange the light kindly. She thought about the train ticket he'd purchased, the one she could still produce the receipt for, because Abigail Harper kept receipts the way other women kept jewelry. And she thought about the one thing Victor Caldwell didn't know she had. His letters. Not just the love letters, the early ones. The ones where he'd asked careful, specific questions about her father's business, about property values, about her family's holdings in Ohio. The ones where his affection had escalated in direct proportion to the financial information she'd provided. She hadn't seen it then. She saw it now. And she had every single letter. Town was busy for a Tuesday. Too busy. Word had traveled. It always did in Pawnee Crossing. And the sidewalks held more people than usual. Men who should have been in fields. Women who should have been home. All of them positioned along the main street with the careful casualness of people who wanted to watch a spectacle without admitting they'd come to watch. Abigail pulled the wagon up to the general store and climbed down. She felt the eyes. Dozens of them. She felt the whisper start before her boots hit the ground. She walked toward the hotel. Victor Caldwell was sitting on the hotel porch. He looked exactly as she remembered. Handsome in a way that was all surface, like lacquer on rotten wood. Clean-shaven, pressed suit, hair oiled, shoes that had never touched actual dirt. He was drinking coffee from a china cup, and beside him sat a young man with a leather case who had to be the lawyer from Topeka. Victor saw her coming. She watched him see her. Watched his eyes do the thing that men's eyes always did. The scan. The measurement. The calculation. He smiled. That smile made her stomach turn. Not because it was cruel, because it was charming. Because it was the same smile that had convinced her, across 37 letters and a borrowed photograph, that somebody wanted her. "Abigail," he said. He stood up. Smooth, rehearsed. "I was hoping we could talk." "Then talk. Perhaps somewhere more private. Here is fine." Victor glanced at the gathering crowd. His smile tightened. He hadn't expected public. He'd expected her to be ashamed, to want walls and closed doors, to hide the way she'd always hidden. Very well. He adjusted his cuffs. I've retained counsel regarding the expenses I incurred in our arrangement. Travel costs, correspondence fees. The engagement itself constituted a verbal contract, and your subsequent marriage to another man represents a clear breach of how much? Victor blinked. I'm sorry? How much are you claiming I owe you, Victor? Give me a number. The lawyer opened his mouth. Victor silenced him with a raised hand. $200, plus legal fees. $200. Abigail repeated it loudly enough for the street to hear. For a train ticket that cost $11.37, and 37 letters that you wrote yourself, at the cost of paper and ink. That's quite a markup. Someone in the crowd laughed. Victor's jaw tightened. The emotional damages. Emotional damages. She stepped closer. You want to talk about emotional damages, Victor? Abigail, I'm trying to be civilized about this. No, you're trying to be profitable about this. She reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with brown twine. Do you recognize these? Victor looked at the letters. Something shifted behind his eyes. A crack in the lacquer. Those are private correspondence. They are. Your private correspondence, in which you ask me, in letter after letter, about my father's dry goods business, about his inventory, about his property holdings, about the estimated value of his estate. She held up one letter. This one, dated March 14th, asks me, and I quote, whether my father's store carried accounts with regional banks, and if so, what the approximate balance might be. She held up another. This one asks about the deed to my father's house, whether it was held free and clear or carried a mortgage. The crowd had gone quiet. Dead quiet. Victor's smile was gone. Those questions were part of normal courtship. Those questions were an audit, Victor. You weren't courting me. You were appraising my family. That's absurd. Is it? She turned to the crowd. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My father's business went bankrupt on June 3rd. Victor Caldwell's telegram arrived on June 4th. One day. One single day between my family losing everything and this man deciding I wasn't worth marrying. She looked back at Victor. You didn't leave because I was too fat. You left because I was too poor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Abigail had ever heard. Victor's face went through a series of changes. Surprise, calculation, anger, and finally, the one expression she'd been waiting for. Panic. The panic of a man whose story has just been rewritten in front of the only audience that matters. This is slander, the lawyer said, standing up. Your client sent a 6-word telegram to a woman who'd crossed 3 states to marry him. Abigail didn't look at the lawyer. She kept her eyes on Victor. 6 words. Not even an explanation. Not even an apology. Just, marriage postponed. Do not seek me. As if I were a package that could be returned. Abigail. Victor's voice had changed. The charm was gone. What was underneath was smaller, harder, meaner. You need to be very careful about what you say next. Or what? You'll leave me at another train station? Someone in the crowd actually gasped. A woman's voice, Abigail didn't see who, said clearly, Lord have mercy. Victor took a step toward her. I came here to settle this quietly. You want to make it ugly? Fine. Let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about the photograph you sent me. Let's talk about the woman in that picture versus the woman standing here. You think any man in this town would have what, Mr. Caldwell? The voice came from behind Abigail. Deep, steady, dangerous in its calm. Samuel Reed stood at the edge of the crowd. He was covered in dust and sweat. His shirt was torn at the sleeve. He had obviously ridden hard from the south pasture, and he was breathing like a man who'd pushed his horse to its limit. But his voice was steady. Utterly, terrifyingly steady. "Would have what?" he repeated. "Go ahead. Finish that sentence." Victor looked at Samuel. The two men measured each other across 20 feet of dusty street, and even the people who didn't know either of them could see the difference. Victor was polished, pressed, clean. Samuel was rough, sun-darkened, real. One man looked like a gentleman. The other looked like he'd die before he broke his word. "This doesn't concern you, Reed," Victor said. "You're standing in my town, threatening my wife and calling her a liar. It concerns me." "She's only your wife because I didn't want her." The words landed like a fist. Abigail felt them hit. Physically in her chest, in her stomach, in the place where every insult she'd ever absorbed was stored. But she didn't step back. And neither did Samuel. "You're right," Samuel said. He walked forward, slow, each step deliberate. "You didn't want her. That's the first honest thing you've said since you rode into this town." He stopped 6 feet from Victor. "You didn't want her, and that's the biggest mistake you'll ever make." Victor sneered. "Touching. The widower and his charity bride." "She ain't charity." Samuel's voice dropped. "She's the smartest person in this county. She caught a grain supplier cheating me in one afternoon that I'd missed for 6 months. She taught my boy to read. My other boy smiles again because of her. She runs my books, my kitchen, and half the conversations in this house. And she does it all without asking for a damn thing in return." He paused. "She's not charity, Caldwell. She's the best deal I ever made." Abigail's throat tightened. She wouldn't cry. She would not cry. Victor looked between them. The crowd was fully against him now. She could feel it, the way the energy had shifted, the way bodies had turned, the way women were looking at Samuel with something that was equal parts admiration and longing. "This isn't over," Victor said. He pointed at the lawyer. "I'll file in county court. I'll have this marriage examined. If she was promised to me first—" "She wasn't promised to you." Abigail's voice cut through like a blade. "I am not property, Victor. I was never your property. You didn't buy me with a train ticket. You didn't reserve me with a letter. And you sure as hell didn't lose me, because you never had me." She stepped forward, close enough to see the sweat on his temples, close enough to see the fear. "Go file your papers," she said. "Go talk to your lawyer. Go tell the whole territory that Victor Caldwell was outsmarted by a fat woman from Ohio. Because that's what happened. You gambled on my father's money, and when it dried up, you ran. And now you're here, trying to squeeze blood from a stone, because you're broke, you're desperate, and you're too proud to admit that you got exactly what you deserved. Nothing." Victor's hand shot forward and grabbed her wrist. The crowd sucked in air. Samuel's hand went to his hip. But Abigail was faster. She wrenched her arm free, hard, with a strength that surprised everyone, including herself. And she stepped back. Not in retreat, in command. "Don't," she said. One word, low and final. Victor stood there with his empty hand still extended, and in that moment, every person on that street saw him for what he was. Not a gentleman, not a wronged suitor. Just a small man grasping at a woman who'd grown too big for his reach. The sheriff stepped forward from the crowd. A heavy-set man with a star on his chest and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too many arguments and settled too few. "Mr. Caldwell," the sheriff said, "I think you've said your piece. I have legal rights. You've got the right to leave peacefully, and you've got the right to leave with an escort. Pick one." Victor looked at the sheriff, at the crowd, at Abigail, at Samuel, whose hand was still resting on his hip with the quiet patience of a man who knew how to wait. "This isn't over," Victor said again. But the words had no weight. They fell flat on the dusty street like dead leaves. He turned. The lawyer gathered his case. They walked toward the hotel. Victor didn't look back, but his shoulders were stiff with a particular kind of humiliation that men like him never forgive and never forget. The crowd didn't cheer. This wasn't that kind of moment. But something moved through them, a murmur, a settling, the collective exhale of a community that had just decided, without a vote or a declaration, which side it was on. An older woman Abigail didn't recognize walked up to her, touched her arm, said, "You come by the church social on Saturday, you hear? I'll save you a seat." A man tipped his hat. Another nodded. Small gestures, but Abigail knew what small gestures meant in a town like this. They meant doors opening. They meant the slow, grudging, beautiful machinery of acceptance grinding into motion. Samuel stood beside her. Not in front, not behind. The side. "I told you to let me handle it," she said. "You did handle it. Then why'd you come?" He looked at her. Those deep-set eyes that always seemed to be watching from somewhere far back inside his skull. "Because beside means showing up, Abigail, even when you don't need me to." She looked at him. He looked at her. The street was emptying. The sun was high and brutal and indifferent. Somewhere, Victor Caldwell was packing his bags, or plotting his revenge, or doing both. But right here, right now, Abigail Reed stood in the middle of a town that had watched her be abandoned, and had just watched her refuse to be broken. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not small, not accommodated, not managed or hidden or apologized for. She felt seen. And the man standing beside her had not rescued her, had not spoken for her, had not fought her battle. He had simply shown up. And that act of presence without possession, was worth more than 37 love letters from a man who'd never loved anything but money. Samuel offered his arm. "Let's go home, Mrs. Reed." Abigail took it. They walked to the wagon together. Thomas was waiting in the back. He'd come with his father, ridden 4 miles in the heat on a horse too big for him, because he'd heard Clara say that Abigail was in trouble. He was red-faced, sweating, furious in the way only a 9-year-old can be furious. "Are you all right?" he demanded. Not gently, not sweetly. With the fierce, angry concern of a boy who didn't know yet that what he was feeling was love. Abigail looked at him. This boy who wouldn't enter rooms she was in, who compared her biscuits to his dead mother's, who slept in a bed made with military precision because if he could control the corners of his sheets, maybe he could control the corners of his grief. "I'm all right, Thomas," she said. "That man grabbed you." "He did." Pa should have hit him. "No, Pa did exactly right." Thomas looked at his father. Samuel said nothing. He climbed into the wagon and picked up the reins. Thomas looked back at Abigail. His face was working, muscles fighting against each other, pride fighting against something deeper. "Nobody grabs you," he said. "Not while I'm here." Then he turned around and sat facing forward, arms crossed, jaw set, a 9-year-old soldier who had just, without knowing it, declared his allegiance. Abigail climbed into the wagon. The springs groaned. She didn't flinch. Samuel drove them home. Nobody spoke for 4 miles, and the silence was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Victor Caldwell did not leave Pawnee Crossing. Abigail knew because Clara told her. Clara told her because the hotel clerk told Clara's husband, who told Clara over breakfast, who rode 2 miles in the heat to tell Abigail before the coffee was cold. "He paid for a full week," Clara said, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her face set in that particular expression of grim determination that Abigail had come to recognize as Clara's version of concern. "A full week, Abigail. A man doesn't pay for a week in a town he plans to leave. No, Abigail agreed. He doesn't. And the lawyer's still with him. They've been meeting with people. Quiet meetings, behind closed doors. Which people? Clara hesitated. Frank Dunlap? Owen Mercer? Bill Tate. Abigail set down her coffee cup. Slowly. Carefully. The way you set things down when your hands want to shake, but you won't let them. She knew those names. Samuel had mentioned them. Ranchers on the county board, men with influence and debts, and the particular kind of moral flexibility that made them useful to someone like Victor. He's not coming after me, Abigail said quietly. He's coming after Samuel's land. Clara stared at her. What? Think about it. He can't win a breach of contract claim against me. Any judge would throw it out. I know it, and his lawyer knows it. But if he can get the county board to call in Samuel's overdue taxes, force a sale, tie up the property in legal proceedings, he'd own the land before Samuel could fight it, or buy it for pennies at auction. Abigail's mind was racing. How overdue is Samuel on the county taxes? You said 3 months. 87 days. The penalty doubles at 90. She stood up. Clara, I need you to do something for me. Name it. I need you to go to every ranch within 10 miles and tell them what Victor Caldwell is doing. Not gossip. Facts. Tell them a man from back east is meeting with county board members about forcing a tax sale on the Reed property. And then ask them one question. What question? Ask them what happens to their land values if an eastern speculator starts buying up Kansas ranches at auction prices. Clara's eyes widened. Then she smiled. A real smile. The first one Abigail had seen on that stern face. You're not just smart, Abigail. You're dangerous. I'm a bookkeeper's daughter. Same thing. Clara left. Abigail stood in the kitchen, hands flat on the table, breathing through the fear that was clawing at her chest. She'd sounded confident. She'd sounded sure. But underneath the confidence, underneath the quick thinking and the sharp words, there was a woman who'd been rejected and abandoned and humiliated. And that woman was terrified that it was about to happen again. She heard Samuel's boots on the porch. He came in with his hat in his hand and dust on his face, and the expression of a man who'd been thinking too hard for too long. Clara just passed me on the road, he said. Wouldn't stop. Just yelled something about Dunlap and Mercer, and kept going. Sit down, Samuel. He sat. She told him everything. She told him about Victor's meetings, about the county board, about the tax deadline. She told him about her theory, that Victor had shifted from attacking her to attacking them, that the public humiliation had forced him to change strategies, that he was now playing a longer, quieter, more dangerous game. Samuel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. 87 days, he said. The penalty doubles at 90. That's 3 days from now. If Dunlap and Mercer push the board to enforce collection with a doubled penalty, you won't be able to pay. I know. How much do you have? In cash? $42. The doubled penalty will be 60. He looked at his hands. Abigail watched him do the math. Not the numbers. He already knew the numbers. The other math. The calculation of pride versus survival. Of asking for help versus losing everything. Of what it meant to sit across from a woman he'd married 5 weeks ago and admit that the life he'd offered her was built on ground that was crumbling. I can get the money, she said. His head snapped up. How? The grain supplier in Wichita, the one who's been overcharging you for 6 months. He owes you a refund. I calculated it. It comes to $63. I wrote to him 2 weeks ago. His reply came yesterday. She pulled a letter from her apron pocket and set it on the table. Samuel picked it up, read it. His face went through 3 expressions in rapid succession. disbelief, then anger, then something that looked like it might be awe. He agreed to the refund? He agreed because I told him I'd report his pricing discrepancies to every rancher in the county. $63 is cheaper than losing 20 customers. Samuel set the letter down. He stared at her across the table. You've been planning this. I've been preparing. There's a difference. Abigail, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing it. This is my home too, Samuel. These are my boys too. And that man out there, she pointed toward town, toward wherever Victor was sitting with his lawyer, and his schemes, and his polished shoes. That man does not get to take one more thing from me. Samuel Reed was not a man who showed emotion easily. 14 months of grief had taught him to keep everything locked behind that jaw, those deep-set eyes, that rigid posture that Thomas had inherited and perfected. But something in Abigail's voice, the fury of it, the certainty, the absolute refusal to yield, cracked something open. You saved the ranch, he said. I saved our ranch. The word our hung in the air between them like a lit match. Neither of them moved toward it. Neither of them blew it out. I'll ride to Wichita tomorrow, he said. Collect the refund. Pay the taxes before the deadline. Take Thomas with you. Thomas? Why? Because he needs to see his father handle business. Because he needs to see a man solve a problem without fists. And because... She paused. Because I need time alone with Caleb. Why? Because that boy has 4 frogs under his bed again, and we need to have a conversation about boundaries. Samuel almost laughed. Almost. That near laugh was becoming familiar. The way his mouth twitched. The way his eyes softened for just a fraction of a second before the armor came back. It was progress. Slow, patient, painstaking progress. He left for Wichita at dawn. Thomas rode beside him, stiff in the saddle, chin up, trying so hard to be a man that it broke Abigail's heart just watching from the porch. Before they left, Thomas had walked up to her, stood in front of her with that rigid posture, looked her in the eye. If that man comes while we're gone, Thomas said, you lock the doors. I will. And if he tries to come inside, Thomas, I can handle Victor Caldwell. I know, but Pa's rifle is above the fireplace. You know how to shoot? My father taught me when I was younger than you. Thomas nodded, satisfied. Then he did something he'd never done before. He reached out and touched her arm. Just a brief touch. The kind a soldier gives another soldier before a battle. Quick, firm, and gone before you could name the emotion behind it. Then he climbed on his horse and rode away with his father, and Abigail stood on the porch with a ghost of that touch burning on her skin like a brand. The day was quiet. Too quiet. Abigail spent the morning with Caleb, negotiating the frog situation. They reached an agreement. 2 frogs maximum, released every Sunday, names optional but encouraged. Caleb named his current residence Senator Hoppington and Princess Wordsworth. And Abigail decided that whatever else happened in her life, helping a 6-year-old named Frogs was time well spent. By noon, she'd finished the week's laundry, balanced the accounts for the 3rd time, and written a letter to her sister in Ohio. A real letter, not the kind she used to write, bright, false, everything's fine letters designed to prevent concern. This one was honest. I married a stranger, she wrote. He is good. His boys are wounded and brave. The town is small and the land is hard, and I have never been happier. I didn't even know I could be happy. I thought happiness was something that happened to smaller women. She sealed it, set it by the door. Then she heard the horses. Not one horse. Several. She moved to the window. 3 riders coming up the road. Not from the direction of town, from the south. And they weren't riding like men with business. They were riding like men with purpose. She recognized the lead rider's horse before she recognized the rider. A black gelding, expensive, too fine for Kansas dust. Victor. And two men she didn't know. Hired men from the look of them. The kind of men you find in border towns. Men whose skills are for sale and whose morals are optional. Abigail's heart slammed against her ribs. Samuel was in Wichita. Thomas was with him. It was just her, Caleb, and a rifle above the fireplace. She moved fast, faster than anyone watching would have expected. She crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, pulled Caleb away from his frogs, and put him in the back bedroom. "Stay here," she said. "Why? What's—" "Caleb, stay here. Do not come out until I tell you." The boy's face went white. He'd heard that tone before, from his mother in the final weeks, when Martha was trying to protect him from the sound of her own dying. He nodded, crawled under the bed, and went silent. Abigail took the rifle from above the fireplace, checked it, loaded. Samuel kept it loaded. Thank God, Samuel kept it loaded. She walked to the front porch. Victor Caldwell pulled his horse up 30 feet from the house. The 2 hired men flanked him. One had a coil of rope on his saddle. The other had a look on his face that Abigail had seen before. The blank, professional expression of a man who'd do whatever he was paid to do and sleep fine afterward. "Abigail," Victor said. He was smiling. That same smile. That same lacquer. "I was hoping we could have a private conversation." "We're having one. Say what you came to say." He glanced at the rifle in her hands. "That's hardly necessary." "That depends on what you say next." Victor dismounted, smooth, casual, as if this were a social call, as if he hadn't brought 2 strangers to a woman's home while her husband was away. "I'll be direct," he said. "The legal route isn't working. Your little performance in town made sure of that. People are emotional. They're taking your side because you gave them a show. Women love a show." He took a step forward. "But shows end, Abigail. And when the show ends, what's left?" "The truth. The truth is that you owe me." "I owe you nothing." "You owe me a life." His voice changed. The charm fell away like a mask hitting the floor, and what was underneath was raw and ugly and real. "I spent 4 months on you. 4 months of letters, planning, arrangements. I turned down other prospects. I invested time and money and reputation. And then your father's pathetic little store collapsed, and you became worthless." He caught himself, adjusted. But the word was out. Worthless. It hung in the air like gun smoke. "You should leave," Abigail said. Her voice was steady. The rifle was steady. But inside, something was shaking. Not fear exactly. Something older and deeper. The tremor of a woman hearing the words she'd been called her whole life, spoken aloud by the one person who'd once made her believe it wasn't true. "I want the letters back," Victor said. "Every one. You destroy them, and I leave. You keep them, and things get complicated." "Complicated how?" He nodded toward the 2 men. "My associates are prepared to search the property, with or without your cooperation." "You'd ransack a woman's home for letters?" "I'd protect my reputation." "Your reputation." Abigail took 1 step forward. The porch boards groaned. "Your reputation is exactly what those letters reveal, Victor. That's why you want them. Not because they're love letters, because they're evidence. Evidence that you're a fraud, a fortune hunter, a man who courted women for their father's money and discarded them when the accounts didn't balance." Victor's face went rigid. "Give me the letters, Abigail." "No." He took another step toward the porch. The hired men shifted in their saddles. One of them moved his hand to his belt. Abigail raised the rifle, not aiming, not threatening, just showing. "You take 1 more step toward this house," she said, "and I will put a bullet in the dirt between your feet." The next one won't be in the dirt." Victor stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw fear. Not physical fear, something worse. The fear of a man realizing he has lost control of a situation he thought he owned. "You wouldn't shoot me," he said, but his voice cracked on the word shoot. "Try me." Silence. Brutal, suffocating silence. And then, hoofbeats. Not from the south, from the east, from the west, from the north. Clara Dawson came first, driving her wagon like a woman possessed, her husband riding beside her. Behind them, the Haskell brothers, 2 ranchers from the next valley, both carrying shotguns across their laps. Then old Tom Patterson on his gray mare. Then the Miller family. Then the Greens. Then faces Abigail didn't recognize. Ranchers and wives and farmhands who'd heard Clara's message and answered it. 11 people. Then 15. Then 20. They pulled up around Victor and his hired men in a wide, silent semicircle. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Clara climbed down from her wagon and walked straight to the porch. She stood beside Abigail, folded her arms. "I brought your neighbors," Clara said. "I see that." They had strong feelings about Eastern speculators buying Kansas land. Tom Patterson rode forward. He was 70 years old, sun-cured leather from head to toe, and he'd been ranching Kansas since before it was a state. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. His voice carried the slow, deliberate weight of a man who'd survived wars and droughts and everything in between. "I've been talking to folks about you, about your meetings with Dunlap and Mercer, about your plans for this property." Victor looked at the gathering crowd. The hired men exchanged glances. One of them had quietly removed his hand from his belt. "I've also been talking to a friend in Topeka," Tom continued. "A judge, actually. Told him about your lawyer's filings. He was interested, particularly in the part about forcing tax sales on occupied family land, using county board members you've been entertaining at the hotel bar." He paused. "That's what they call conspiracy to defraud in legal terms. My judge friend was very specific about that." Victor's face drained of color. Not slowly. All at once, like water from a broken glass. "You're bluffing." "Son, I'm 73 years old. I don't have enough time left to bluff." The sheriff appeared at the edge of the group. Same tired expression. Same star on his chest. He rode forward and looked down at Victor from his saddle. "Mr. Caldwell, I've received a complaint from Mrs. Reed about armed men on her property while her husband is away." He looked at the 2 hired men. "You boys have business here?" The hired men looked at Victor. Victor said nothing. "Didn't think so," the sheriff said. "I'll escort you gentlemen back to town. And Mr. Caldwell, I'd suggest you settle your hotel bill and catch the next train east. The hospitality in Pawnee Crossing has about run dry for you." Victor stood perfectly still. The circle of ranchers and wives and neighbors didn't move. The silence was absolute. Then he did something Abigail didn't expect. He looked at her, not with hatred, not with the calculated charm that was his default weapon, but with something honest, something small and bitter and real. "You were supposed to be grateful," he said quietly. "You were supposed to be the kind of woman who'd be grateful that any man wanted her." Abigail looked at him, at this man who had written her 37 letters, full of words he didn't mean, who had built a trap disguised as love and baited it with the one thing she'd been starving for her whole life: acceptance. Who had looked at her body and seen not a woman, but a vulnerability he could exploit. "I was grateful," she said, "for about 30 seconds on a train platform. Then a man with 2 boys and a broken-down ranch looked at me and saw something you never bothered to look for." "And what's that?" "A partner." Victor Caldwell stared at her for 5 full seconds. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode toward town without another word. The hired men followed. The sheriff followed them. The ranchers stayed. One by one, they approached the porch. Handshakes, nods, a few words. "You need anything, Mrs. Reed? We're just down the road. Your husband's a lucky man." Then they left too. Clara was last. "The peach pie offer still stands," she said, "and I don't say that to just anyone." "Clara?" "Yes?" "You rode to every ranch in the county in one day." "I did?" "On that old horse." "He's not old, he's experienced." Clara untied her reins. "Same as me." Then she was gone, and Abigail stood on the porch alone, the rifle still in her hands, the taste of adrenaline still sharp on her tongue. She set the rifle down, walked inside, opened the bedroom door. Caleb was under the bed, arms wrapped around Senator Hoppington and Princess Wordsworth, eyes wide as dinner plates. "Is the bad man gone?" he whispered. Abigail knelt down. Her knees protested, her back ached. Every part of her body that had been running on fear and fury for the last hour suddenly remembered how heavy it was. "He's gone," she said. Caleb crawled out. He looked up at her with those deep-set eyes, Samuel's eyes, and said, "You scared him away, didn't you?" "I had help." "But you were the one with the rifle." She almost smiled. "Yes, I was the one with the rifle." Caleb nodded solemnly. Then he held up both frogs. "Senator Hoppington was very brave too. He didn't even pee." Abigail laughed, a real laugh, a laugh that hurt her ribs and filled her lungs and pushed the fear out of her body like air pushing smoke from a room. She pulled Caleb into her arms and held him. He was small and warm and alive, and he smelled like grass and frog water and childhood. He let her hold him. He didn't squirm. He put his head against her chest and listened to her heartbeat. "It's fast," he said. "I know. Is it because you were scared?" "Yes." "Are you still scared?" She held him tighter. "Not anymore." Samuel and Thomas returned at dusk. They rode in hard, covered in road dust, Thomas's face white with urgency. Clara's husband had met them on the road and told them everything. Samuel was off his horse before it fully stopped. He crossed the yard in 4 long strides. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, and he stopped in front of Abigail, with his chest heaving and his hands shaking and his voice raw. "Are you hurt?" "No." "The boys?" "Safe. Caleb's frogs are emotionally compromised, but recovering." Samuel stared at her. His hands were still shaking. He looked at the rifle propped against the porch rail. He looked at the hoof prints in the yard. He looked at her. "I should have been here," he said. "You were where you needed to be, paying the taxes, saving the ranch. I should have been here." "Samuel." She took his hands, his shaking hands. She held them in both of hers. They were rough and calloused and warm, and they gripped hers back with a force that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with fear. "I handled it." "I know you handled it. That's not—" He stopped, closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Not tears. Samuel Reed did not cry, not in front of people, maybe not ever. But wet. Close. Dangerously close. "I can't lose someone else from this porch," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't stand on this porch and lose one more person, Abigail. I can't do it again." She understood. In that moment, she understood everything. Not just what he was saying, but what he couldn't say. That Martha had stood on this porch. That Martha had been strong too. That strength hadn't saved her. That nothing had saved her. And that Samuel Reed, for all his steady quiet and all his careful distance, was terrified that the same God who had taken his first wife would find a reason to take his second. "You're not going to lose me," she said. "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay." He looked at her. She looked at him. The distance between them, the careful, measured, respectful distance they'd maintained for 5 weeks, closed by exactly 1 inch. Not a kiss, not an embrace, just 1 inch. But in that 1 inch was everything. Thomas stood at the edge of the porch, watching. His face was unreadable. His fists were clenched. Then he walked forward, and he stood next to Abigail. Not next to his father, next to her. And Caleb burst through the front door with both frogs held aloft and announced, "Senator Hoppington says he's hungry, and also, Pa, you missed the most exciting day ever." Samuel looked at his sons, looked at his wife, looked at the house that was still standing, the yard that was still his, the life that was, against all odds, still intact. "Let's go inside," he said. They went inside, all 4 of them, together. Samuel Reed kissed his wife for the first time on a Thursday. Not the wedding day, not the night she saved the ranch, not the morning after Victor Caldwell was escorted out of Pawnee Crossing by the sheriff and 2 ranchers who made it very clear that the next train east was not a suggestion. A Thursday, 6 weeks and 4 days after a stranger on a train platform said, "He's already gone," and changed the course of his entire life. It happened in the kitchen. Because of course it happened in the kitchen. The room where Abigail had staked her claim on this family. 1 biscuit and 1 balanced ledger and 1 released frog at a time. She was writing. Not the accounts. Those were done, organized, current for the first time in over a year. She was writing a letter to her father. A letter she'd started 3 times and abandoned twice because the words kept coming out either too angry or too kind, and neither felt honest. Samuel came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway. She didn't look up. "Your father wrote to you," he said. Her pencil stopped. "What?" He held out an envelope. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Small, cramped, the penmanship of a man who'd spent his life writing inventory lists and sale receipts. Her father's hand. She took it, held it, didn't open it. "When did this come?" "Tuesday. I picked it up in town." "That was 2 days ago." "I know." He sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure if you wanted it." "You opened it?" "No." I held it up to the light. He paused. "It's short." Abigail looked at the envelope. Her name was written on the front. Her maiden name. Abigail Harper. Not Reed. Her father didn't know her married name. Her father didn't know she was married. Her father didn't know anything, because she hadn't written to him. Hadn't wanted to. Hadn't been ready to reckon with the man who traded his unmarriable daughter for the promise of a son-in-law with clean fingernails and Eastern manners. She opened it. The letter was 4 lines long. "Abigail, I have heard from your sister that you are married. I hope he is a better man than the one I chose for you. I am sorry. I did not know what Caldwell was. Your father." 4 lines. 14 months of silence. A lifetime of making his daughter feel like a problem to be solved. And 4 lines. Abigail set the letter down. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. But something behind her eyes was moving. A tectonic shift. The kind of deep, slow upheaval that happens when a person who has been carrying a weight for 28 years feels one small piece of it crack loose. "What does it say?" Samuel asked. "He's sorry." "Is that enough?" She looked at him. "Is it ever?" Samuel was quiet. He understood the question. He'd asked it himself, in the months after Martha died, in the silence of a house that still smelled like her, in the nights when he'd stood on the porch and raged at a God who couldn't even be bothered to let him say goodbye. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry was never enough. But sometimes, sorry was the only door people knew how to open, and you either walked through it, or you stood outside in the cold forever. "I'm going to write him back," she said. "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet." She folded the letter along its original creases. "But I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not going to tell him everything's fine, and I'm not going to tell him he's forgiven." She paused. "I'm going to tell him the truth, that I married a good man, that I have 2 boys who need me, that I am more than what he thought I was, and that I hope he lives long enough to see it." Samuel looked at her across that kitchen table, the same table where they'd sat that first night, strangers, measuring each other, calculating the odds. The same table where Thomas had come to sit in the dark, not for her company, but for the silence she offered. The same table where she'd spread out his ruined accounts and rebuilt his finances with a pencil and a memory for numbers that bordered on miraculous. He reached across and took her hand. She looked at his hand on hers. Rough. Calloused. Real. "Abigail." "Yes?" "I need to tell you something." "All right." "That first day, at the station." He paused. His jaw worked. Whatever he was about to say was costing him something, and Samuel Reed was not a man who spent words cheaply. "I didn't ask you to marry me because you were standing there and I was desperate." "Samuel, you don't have to." "I asked you because of the way you held that suitcase." He tightened his grip on her hand. "You held it like a weapon, not like luggage. Like something you'd fight with if you had to. And I thought, this woman has been knocked down, and she's still standing. And she's holding on to the only thing she's got left, like she'll swing it at the next person who tries to take it from her." He looked at her eyes. "I didn't see a woman who needed saving. I saw a woman who'd already saved herself, and I thought, maybe she can teach me how." Abigail's throat closed. She pressed her lips together. She would not cry. She had promised herself, standing on that platform, soaked in sweat, clutching a telegram that reduced her entire worth to 6 words, that she would not cry. She cried. Not the delicate, controlled tears that women were supposed to cry. Not the single drop rolling down the cheek tears of novels and stage plays. Real crying. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your nose run and sounds ugly and human and alive. Samuel didn't tell her to stop. He didn't hand her a handkerchief. He didn't look away. He held her hand across that kitchen table, and he waited. When she finished, she wiped her face with the back of her free hand and said, "That's the first time I've cried since I got here." "I know." "You were counting?" "I was watching." He stood up, walked around the table, stood in front of her. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." She looked up at him. "It's been 6 weeks." "I wanted to be sure."
Sure of what?
"That I wasn't kissing you because I was lonely. I wanted to be sure I was kissing you because of you." She stood up. They were close, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body, close enough to see the lines around his eyes that grief had carved and sun had deepened. She was taller than she expected to be next to him, or maybe he was shorter. It didn't matter. They fit. He kissed her. It was not a movie kiss. It was not a first kiss fireworks kiss. It was a Thursday morning in a kitchen kiss. Gentle, certain. The kiss of 2 people who had earned each other through silence and ledgers and released frogs in one terrible, beautiful, impossible day on a train platform. When they separated, Abigail said, "Your coffee's getting cold." Samuel said, "I don't care." She almost laughed. He almost smiled. And in that almost, in that shared space between restraint and surrender, something that had been building for 6 weeks finally settled into place. Not with a crash, not with fireworks, with the quiet, solid click of a door closing against the wind. They were married. And now, for the first time, they both knew it. The weeks that followed moved with purpose. Abigail threw herself into the ranch with an energy that startled even Clara Dawson, who had once described her own work ethic as ungodly. She renegotiated the feed contracts. She organized a cooperative buying arrangement with 4 neighboring ranches that reduced everyone's costs by 12%. She started a ledger system so clean and precise that the bank manager in town asked if she'd consider doing books for other families. "For a fee," she said. "Of course." A fair fee, not a charity fee, not a woman's fee. A fair fee. The bank manager blinked. "Yes, ma'am." She charged $2 per ranch per month. Within 3 weeks, she had 7 clients. The money went into a tin box she kept in the kitchen. Not hidden, not locked, sitting right there on the shelf where anyone could see it. Her money, earned by her mind, her skill, her refusal to be anything less than competent. Samuel watched this transformation with an expression that shifted daily, from surprise to admiration, to something that looked like pride, but ran deeper than pride. He watched his wife become a person the town needed, not just a person the town tolerated. He watched the same women who had whispered, "Too big for a bride," start showing up at the kitchen door with questions about their household finances. He watched the men who'd stared at her on the platform start tipping their hats when she passed. But it was Thomas who changed the most. The shift was glacial, so slow that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. But Abigail was paying attention. She was always paying attention. It started with the doorways. Thomas stopped hovering in them. He started entering rooms she was in. Not with warmth, not with the easy affection that Caleb showed, but with a grudging willingness to share space that, for a 9-year-old boy made of grief and pride, was a revolution. Then it was the biscuits. He stopped comparing them to Martha's. He just ate them, silently. But he ate 3 instead of 1, and Abigail counted. Then it was the reading. She'd been teaching him, not formally, not with the rigid structure of a schoolroom, but the way her own mother had taught her, with books left open on tables, with stories told at night, with questions asked and asked again until the asking itself became a kind of conversation. Thomas was smart, furiously smart, the kind of smart that hides behind silence because the world hasn't yet told it that intelligence is something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. He devoured every book she brought into the house. He asked questions she couldn't always answer. He argued with her interpretations, challenged her conclusions, pushed back on her opinions with a ferocity that would have been rude in an adult, but in a 9-year-old was breathtaking. "You're wrong about that story," he told her one night, standing in the kitchen doorway. Old habits died hard. "The hero wasn't brave. He was just too stupid to be scared." "There's a difference?" "Of course there's a difference. Brave means you're scared and you do it anyway. Stupid means you don't know enough to be scared in the first place." Abigail looked at him. "Which one was your father when he asked me to marry him?" Thomas considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Brave," he said finally. "Pa's always scared. He just doesn't let it stop him." "And which one am I?" Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very softly, "You're the bravest person I know, because you're scared of everything, and you do everything anyway." He walked away before she could respond. His footsteps were quiet now, not the angry stamps of a boy at war with the world, the measured steps of a boy who was, slowly and reluctantly, and with great difficulty, learning to let someone in. It was a Saturday in late August when it happened. Abigail had started a reading circle. Not a formal school, the county didn't have one and wouldn't for years, but a Saturday gathering at the Reed Ranch where ranch children could come and learn. She had started with 3 kids. By the 4th week, she had 11. By the 6th week, she had 17 and 2 mothers who stayed to listen. She taught them letters and numbers and the basic architecture of stories. How beginnings hook you, middles test you, and endings change you. She taught them that books weren't luxuries, that reading wasn't something that only rich Eastern children got to do, that every story ever written was a door, and every child who learned to read held the key. Thomas helped. He didn't call it helping. He called it making sure the little ones don't eat the books. But he helped. He sat next to the youngest children and sounded out words with a patience that would have been unrecognizable 6 weeks ago. He corrected their mistakes with a gentleness that made Abigail's chest ache. On this particular Saturday, with 17 children sitting on the porch and the yard and every available surface, Abigail was reading aloud when she heard Caleb's voice from inside the house. "Pa, do I have to go to the reading circle? Senator Hoppington is sick." Samuel's voice. "Senator Hoppington is a frog, Caleb." "He's a sick frog. He needs me." "He needs a pond. Go to the reading circle." Caleb appeared on the porch, carrying the allegedly ill Senator Hoppington, and announced to the assembled children, "My frog is sick, and I'm only here under protest." The children laughed. Abigail shook her head. Thomas rolled his eyes with the theatrical exhaustion of an older brother who has endured a lifetime of amphibian drama. She went back to reading. She read for an hour. When she finished, the children scattered, to the yard, to the barn, to the road home. The mothers thanked her. One of them pressed her hand and said, "My girl asked me to read to her last night. First time she ever asked." Abigail held that sentence in her chest like a coal. When the yard was empty and the afternoon was winding down, she sat on the porch step. Not in Martha's rocker. She still hadn't sat in Martha's rocker. That felt like a threshold she wasn't ready for, or maybe one she was saving. Thomas came out. He sat next to her, not across from her, not at a distance, next to her, their shoulders almost touching. "You're good at that," he said. "At what?" "Teaching, making people want to listen." "Thank you, Thomas." He picked at a splinter on the porch rail, worked it back and forth with his thumbnail. She waited. "My ma would have liked you," he said. The words hit her like a physical force. She felt them in her sternum, in her spine, in the backs of her eyes. She breathed through it, carefully, the way you breathe when you're holding something fragile that you didn't expect anyone to hand you. "I would have liked her too," Abigail said. "She was small, real small. Pa used to pick her up like she was nothing." He paused. "You're not small." "No, I'm not. But you're big in a different way. Not just—" He struggled, words failing a boy who usually had too many of them. "Not just your body. Big like you fill things up. The house used to be empty. Even when we were all in it, it was empty. And now it's—" He stopped. "Full?" she offered. "Yeah." He looked at her. Those deep-set eyes. Samuel's eyes. Martha's grief still living in them, but softer now. Shared. Survivable. Full. They sat together in the late afternoon quiet, and Abigail realized something. She realized that she had spent her entire life being told she was too much, too big, too wide, too heavy, too present, and that every person who had told her that had been wrong. Not because her body was different than they said. Her body was exactly what they said. Wide, heavy, present, taking up space. They were wrong because too much was not a flaw. It was a capacity. A capacity to fill empty houses, to hold grieving boys, to balance broken ledgers, to face down men who thought they owned her, to stand on a porch with a rifle and a 6-year-old's frogs and refuse to be moved. She was not too much. She was exactly enough. Samuel came out. He leaned against the porch post, looked at Thomas sitting next to Abigail. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, because he'd been watching this happen for weeks. something deeper. Something that looked like the first breath after a long time underwater. "Caleb wants to know if Senator Hoppington can sleep in the kitchen tonight," Samuel said, "on account of his illness." "Senator Hoppington sleeps outside," Abigail said. "He said you'd say that. He's prepared a counter-argument." "Is the counter-argument crying?" "The counter-argument is crying, yes." Abigail stood up. "Senator Hoppington sleeps outside. Caleb can check on him once before bed. Final offer." Samuel nodded. "I'll relay the terms." He turned to go inside, then stopped, turned back, looked at her standing on the porch with his older son beside her, the late son on her face, her hands at her sides, not pressed against her stomach, not folded in front of her, not clutching anything for protection, just at her sides, open, unguarded. "Abigail." "Yes?" "I didn't save you that day." She looked at him. "No, you didn't." "You know what I did?" "You offered a door." He shook his head. "I got lucky. That's what I did. I got the luckiest I've ever been in my life. And I was too stubborn to see it at first." She held his gaze. "And now?" "Now I see it every morning when I walk into that kitchen and you're already there. Every time I hear Caleb laugh. Every time Thomas sits down at a table instead of standing in a doorway." His voice was rough, not with tears. Samuel Reed still didn't cry. Not quite. Not yet. But close. Always close now. "You didn't walk through a door, Abigail. You built one. Where there wasn't one before. You built a door and you walked through it and you held it open for the rest of us." Thomas stood up. He walked to the porch rail, looked out at the road, the same road that led to town, to the train station, to the platform where a woman had stood alone with a crumpled telegram and a suitcase and a choice. "Ma?" he said. One word, one syllable. He said it without thinking. The way children say things that have been building for weeks, building in silence, building in doorways and kitchen tables, and reluctant compliments about biscuits. Building until the word is so full it can't be held anymore, and it just falls out, natural as breathing. "Ma!" Abigail froze. Her whole body went still. Every muscle, every breath, every heartbeat, suspended in the space between hearing and believing. Thomas realized what he'd said. His face flushed. His shoulders went rigid. He opened his mouth, to take it back, to correct it, to retreat behind the armor he'd been wearing since Martha died. "Don't," Abigail said softly. "Don't take it back." He looked at her. His eyes were shining. 9 years old and so full of grief and love and fear and hope that his small body could barely contain it all. "I wasn't trying to. I know. She's still She will always be your mother, Thomas. Always. Nothing I do, nothing I am, changes that. She was here first. She loved you first. She will always be first." Abigail's voice cracked. She let it crack. "But there's room. There's room for both." Thomas looked at her for a long time, the longest he'd ever looked at her without armor, without walls, without the protective fury that had been his only companion since the night his mother died in the back bedroom of this house. Then he walked forward, and he put his arms around her. He was small against her, his head barely reaching her chest, his thin arms not even making it all the way around her waist. He held on, tight. The way you hold on to something you've been refusing to reach for, because reaching means admitting you need it. Abigail held him back. She wrapped her arms around this boy, this fierce, brilliant, broken, healing boy, and she held him with everything she had. With her big arms and her broad shoulders and her body that had been called too much by every person who'd ever failed to see that too much was exactly what a grieving child needed. Caleb burst through the door. "Senator Hoppington is—" "Oh." He stopped, looked at Thomas hugging Abigail. His face split into the widest grin she'd ever seen. "Finally," he said, with the exasperated satisfaction of a 6-year-old who'd been waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Can we have pie now?" Samuel laughed. A real laugh, full and open and startled out of him by his own 6-year-old. The sound filled the porch and rolled out across the yard and disappeared into the Kansas evening. And Abigail thought, that sound. That's what I crossed 3 states for.